Hello everyone, this is your friend Naruto Nexus 2.0 and we are back with a new fanfic. What if Naruto joined the academy early? Montenya of the Fairies Part 1. This was actually part of a larger story centering on the Hokage as he realizes just how much in his dominion needs to be reformed, but Avenue writers block on that, and I think Iruka's perspective, which is finished, is able to stand on its own. So here is that. Yumi no Iruka, proud Chunin of Leaf, blinked. Then flickered his chakra, just in case. What was that again, Hokage? The Hokage sighed. After the incident involving Naruto's graduation, we of course proceeded to investigate any other sign of intentional impairment of Naruto's, or anyone else's, ability. You, Yumino, are the only academy instructor to have turned up completely clean, even when we expanded our investigation to include every sensei and administrator in the academy. Iruka blinked again. This, of course, the Hokage continued, led to an in-depth examination involving our entire shinobi force and, well, Iruka, to some extent, already knew that something like that was happening. After all, one of the legendary Sannin didn't generally just randomly show up in the city, and ever sink. About a week ago, a little more than 3 days after the incident, nearly every ninja, Chunin level and up, had been pulling double and triple shifts without being told why. Simply put, Yumino, our forces are about to be gutted. You are currently the only remotely prepared option to run the academy, especially given that all of the other options are needed elsewhere. Iruka gulped, then nodded. But that hadn't been his main concern. Yes, Hokage, but completely restructuring it. The current structure has proven far too ripe for abuse, and quite frankly I do not have the time nor energy, nor apparently expertise, to do it myself. You will of course have the full support of R&D, and all records of past years up to A-level clearance, but this will have to be run by you. There is simply no other choice. Iruka really didn't like that. But he was a loyal Chunin. No, Tokubetsu Jonin, even if he still didn't completely understand why he deserved the promotion, so he pushed back his many misgivings and bowed, accepting the mission. Good. Now, Anbu Martin will lead you to a room to familiarize yourself with the files. Given the circumstances, there will be a full month until the academy starts again, so you'll have almost a full 3 weeks to have enough of a plan to implement. Quote. With that, Iruka was dismissed and led into a medium-sized room within the administrative section of the building. The room held a desk, a chair, and about 3 tons of paper. Unfortunately, Iruka was fairly sure that wasn't an exaggeration. He spoke up as the Anbu prepared to leave. Do I get any assistance? The Anbu shrugged. That was not a good sign. He turned and looked at the room. Out of the corner of his eye, the Anbu disappeared. He sighed, then hefted the stack paper on the chair onto the floor and sat. About 20 days. He had to restructure the academy for the shinobi of an entire nation in 20 days. Despite what the Hokage had said about him treating the little blonde-haired brat well, he kind of wanted to kill him. Right now. 20 days. 20. The words in Iruka's head weren't pleasant. Simply put, Yumino, our forces are about to be gutted. You are currently the only remotely prepared option to run the academy, especially given that all of the other options are needed elsewhere. Quote. Iruka gulped, then nodded. But that hadn't been his main concern. Yes, Hokage, but completely restructuring it. The current structure has proven far too ripe for abuse, and quite frankly I do not have the time nor energy, nor apparently expertise, to do it myself. You will of course have the full support of R&D, and all records of past years up to A-level clearance, but this will have to be run by you. There is simply no other choice. Iruka really didn't like that. But he was a loyal Chunin. No, Tokubetsu Jonin, even if he still didn't completely understand why he deserved the promotion, so he pushed back his many misgivings and bowed, accepting the mission. Good. Now, Anbu Martin will lead you to a room to familiarize yourself with the files. Given the circumstances, There will be a full month until the academy starts again, so you'll have almost a full 3 weeks to have enough of a plan to implement. Quote. With that, Iruka was dismissed and led into a medium-sized room within the administrative section of the building. The room held a desk, a chair, and about 3 tons of paper. Unfortunately, Iruka was fairly sure that wasn't an exaggeration. He spoke up as the Anbu prepared to leave. Do I get any assistance? The Anbu shrugged. That was not a good sign. He turned and looked at the room. Out of the corner of his eye, the Anbu disappeared. He sighed, then hefted the stack paper on the chair onto the floor and sat. About 20 days. He had to restructure the academy for the shinobi of an entire nation in 20 days. Despite what the Hokage had said about him treating the little blonde-haired brat well, he kind of wanted to kill him. Right now. 20 days. 20. The words in Iruka's head weren't pleasant. Simply put, Yumino, our forces are about to be gutted. You are currently the only remotely prepared option to run the academy, especially given that all of the other options are needed elsewhere. Quote. Iruka gulped, then nodded. But that hadn't been his main concern. Yes, Hokage, but completely restructuring it. The current structure has proven far too ripe for abuse, and quite frankly I do not have the time nor energy, nor apparently expertise, to do it myself. You will of course have the full support of R&D, and all records of past years up to A-level clearance, but this will have to be run by you. There is simply no other choice. Iruka really didn't like that. But he was a loyal Chunin. No, Tokubetsu Jonin, even if he still didn't completely understand why he deserved the promotion, so he pushed back his many misgivings and bowed, accepting the mission. Good. Now, Anbu Martin will lead you to a room to familiarize yourself with the files. Given the circumstances, there will be a full month until the academy starts again, so you'll have almost a full 3 weeks to have enough of a plan to implement. Quote. With that, Iruka was dismissed and led into a medium-sized room within the administrative section of the building. The room held a desk, a chair, and about 3 tons of paper. Unfortunately, Iruka was fairly sure that wasn't an exaggeration. He spoke up as the Anbu prepared to leave. Do I get any assistance? The Anbu shrugged. That was not a good sign. He turned and looked at the room. Out of the corner of his eye, the Anbu disappeared. He sighed, then hefted the stack paper on the chair onto the floor and sat. About 20 days. He had to restructure the academy for the shinobi of an entire nation in 20 days. Despite what the Hokage had said about him treating the little blonde-haired brat well, he kind of wanted to kill him. Right now. 20 days. As it turned out, he was allowed assistance. By the end of the day he had been oh so kindly gifted 4 Chunin, who were to become some of his instructors following the restructuring. They seemed nice enough. Really, a snarky but oddly polite, and awake Nara, 2 Yamanaka who both had irritating habits of picking apart the minds of anyone they were near, and a non-clan ninja named Hisoka. Iruka was about 90% sure he had been an orphan who was allowed to choose his own name. Because really, what they were good for was reading through the absolute mountain of information he'd been given, deciding what was even relevant, and then condensing that into the smallest chunk possible so that Iruka could focus on applying that information. For that reason, he made an active effort to explain whatever it was he was thinking of doing, and why, but all that meant was that they occasionally had to fish through already sorted piles because they'd thought of something that might now be relevant. All of this was so time-consuming, so intensive, that he'd so far been completely unable to come up with anything actually approaching a model of an academy before it was torn down by someone suggesting a new security concern or additional function that the academy should have. The one thing that had actually helped was the almost complete lack of oversight. Iruka knew for a fact that the Hokage got regular reports, of course, but besides that he'd seen neither hide nor hair of the Council of Elders or clan heads who had been a constant, and irritatingly time-consuming, prior to his newest promotion and responsibilities. He tried not to think of what that meant. Actually, he tried not to think of what a lot of the differences he had noticed meant. He spent almost 18 hours a day in the room, now, and when he wasn't there he was either trying to catch own sleep in his apartment or scarfing down food from whatever vendor was closest. Even that short a time, however, was enough for Iruka to notice more changes than he was comfortable with. The shinobi, for one, were way more harried and suspicious than he was used to them being, and for another the civilians he came across seemed to be outright afraid, even if he couldn't tell where the fear was focused. It was also notable that rather than the teams of 3 Iruka was used to, most genin were grouped in 9s or 12s, all under one jonin. Then, too, there was the warning he had been given to expect a much larger academy population, and not just in the first year, but in all of them. He was also warned that they would each have holes in nearly every aspect of shinobi, and day-to-day life, and very few of their holes would be exactly identical. This had not helped Iruka's efforts. Neither had the knowledge that the Hokage was making almost daily speeches to the population, now. He'd yet to have actually heard one, and out of all of his assistants only Yamanaka Tsubasa had been able to catch the tail end of one, which had mostly been about how there would be major, but necessary, changes and everyone needed to keep their spirits up and their will of fire strong, but he'd been assured by the Anbu that they would notify him of anything important, like the change in academy makeup. Closing parenthesis. Maybe another year, Naruto suggested. I know it's not conventional, and probably won't have much support, but then it doesn't look like anyone'll say no to anything at this point. But is another year worth the cost, both in terms of money and manpower? Hisoka asked. Iruka rubbed his forehead. Alright, all of you make a list of individual pros and cons. Hisoka and Fuyuko, you focus on the negatives. Think of any costs the additional year will bring, and be creative. Tsubasa and Chio, you focus on the positives, but make sure to add any additional negatives those would cause. Yes, Taicho. They recited. Iruka turned back to the giant chalkboard he'd gotten nailed to one of the walls. The entire board was filled with all the various skills, experiences, and competencies that they, or the many papers, some of which included very detailed suggestions for just this occasion from various clans, thought should probably be kept, added to the academy schedule. It had gotten long enough that a 4th, or maybe even 5th, year of the academy was probably all but necessary, but that amount of manpower, especially when it seemed as if they'd be working with a shortage of it, was not exactly an easy obstacle to overcome. He grimaced as he noticed one of the new additions. Who added Fuinjutsu? I did, Taicho. Tsubasa said. I know it hasn't really been taught at the academy level in Konoha before, but we were once the second best nation in Fuinjutsu, and while we are technically first now that won't last long, considering not one chunin or lower specializes in or even studies it. That was irritatingly accurate, from Iruka's own recollections. They had a few retired jonin who were contracted to make exploding tags and storage seals for the village on a regular basis, and they still had the Sannin and his elver-haired student as experts or near enough, but beyond that almost everyone else who had shown talent had either been killed one way or the other in past wars and conflicts, or had been part of the chunk of R&D that had fled with the Sannin traitor, making them worse than useless. And hadn't that been a shock, when it had happened all those years ago? It was a wonder a reorganization like this hadn't happened then, but then Iruka was pretty sure this one wouldn't have been started if there hadn't been a disturbing pattern of entire sections R&D, police, academy, being Sabo tagged all at one time. We're going to need a new board, aren't we? Iruka mumbled. Don't forget that we still have to decide how we're treating clan kids, non-clan kids, civilian kids, orphan kids, city kids, country kids, noble kids, well, all of the kids, really. Chio said. Iruka's eyebrows furrowed. What do you mean? Well, the past academy generally treated them the same, but that gave clan kids a big lead because of all the at-home training they got and also left most of them bored out of their mind in class. Yes, I'm speaking from experience, Hisoka. Shut up. While civilian kids had to be hand-walked through everything and were the most likely to quit, and country kids usually had to be introduced to the idea of chakra outright, and noble kids have their parents. My point is they all have their various issues, and treating them all the same way. LLY didn't work. Uruka outright groaned. Anbu-san, he called out. An Anbu with a koi mask appeared from who knows where. I'm sorry, but could we get one, no, two, more chalkboards, some more chalk, some more paper, and ink, and some more storage seals please? The koi nodded, then disappeared. Uruka would never get used to them actually listening to him. Good thinking on the storage seals, by the way. Fuyuko said. She'd think so. Using them to sort already read documents had allowed for enough room for an additional 3 chairs to be stuffed in, so only one chunin had to stand at a time. Yumino-san, Koi-san said, slipping back into the room with the requested material. Yes. The Hokage wishes to inform you that despite his best efforts you will have to explain your plan, or at least an outline of it, to a meeting of important people say. Then days before the start of the next semester. Uruka nodded his acknowledgement, and the Anbu disappeared again. A week before class, that gave him 10 days, and he had to have at least an idea in 8, or else there was no way he'd be done in time. Not to mention, important peoples. Taicho. Tsubasa asked. Yes. Uruka said again. I've got a suggestion here from the Aburame clan to include what basically amounts to creepiness desensitization in the academy. Should I add it to the board? Uruka sighed. Less than 40 hours before the meeting, Taicho. Chio said the second Uruka walked through the door. He was still chewing his food but nodded his understanding. Their 3 chalkboards were now completely full, to the point of near illegibility, and while most of the stacks of paper had been sealed into 50-odd storage seals, he and his chunin had made up for it by adding an additional half-ton of paper to the room's already stuffed interior. At least there was now 4 chairs around the table, and a simple mat crammed into one of the corners for when any of them needed a quick cat nap. Okay, so that's definitely most, if not all, of the clan heads, at least some of the civilian council, and the elders, too. Those are unlikely to disappear, what with them being his former teammates. Uruka said. Don't forget the heads of the departments. Fuyuko said. The Sanin too, if he wants to listen in, and probably some of the high-level Jonin on top of that. Quote. So everyone important. Great. Uruka said. I mean, it is their kids and future teammates and underlings we're talking about. Chio said. Is it really so surprising that they're going to want to go over your plan with a fine-toothed comb before implementing it, even if they don't want to come up with it? Uruka couldn't argue the point, and decided now was a good time to move on to the implementation of his plan. How's the classroom setup going? He asked. Haven't really spent much time on it, Taicho. Tsubasa admitted. Only a few of the classroom interiors have to be changed, so I've just been focusing on counter-arguments. Figured I'd do the actual academy layout in the final week. Uruka grunted, but couldn't disagree. If it helps, I've mostly finished the frameworks for the first week or so's lessons, pending revision. Hisoka said, pulling a few sheets of paper out of who knows where. I'm also pretty sure the Hokage already knows the gist of our plans, because a list of possible instructors was on the table. Hanai arrived today, Chio said. She handed over the sheet, and Uruka decided to examine it first while the rest of them went back to work. It was almost depressingly short, but fairly well detailed for all that. Most, unsurprisingly, were chunin, but Uruka had not expected to find a pretty sizable number of retired jonin on there too, even if they all had injuries that ensured active duty wasn't an option. Their talents were fairly varied, as well, which meant that he could actually specialize them a bit more than he'd hoped for. He began adding his own notes to the margin of the page, even if he had to change his plans after the meeting. Making notes beforehand would allow the Hokage to know who he should reserve or put in other positions earlier. He then moved on to the lesson plans Hisoka had prepared, listening idly as the two Yamanaka argued about which defense to their Year 3 setup was best, and Chio had Hisoka double-check a past report on genin deficiencies to make sure the statistics Iruka would have to use were correct. It hadn't been easy these last few days. Iruka couldn't actually remember the last conversation he had that wasn't about work, and he was exhausted. He hadn't gotten more than 4 hours of sleep for every 24 since day 3, and even before then he was only getting about 6. The massive amount of paperwork, at least, had helped, as he knew for a fact he wouldn't have been able to start from ground zero. As it turned out, nearly every clan, large or small, as well as too many civilians to name, had submitted some kind of recommendation involving the academy, and every time they had their recommendation had been stored, no matter how trivial or insane their suggestion was. That, as well as disturbingly in-depth descriptions of how every other nation approached teaching, and may he never read about mists again, had given him sufficient information to create his plan. But that didn't mean he was very certain of it. No matter what the Hokage had done, he still felt like a Chunin, and it was hard for him to believe that any Chunin plan should actually have as much impact on the nation as a whole as his would. He was as sure as he could be that his plan was a good one. But the fact was that he couldn't be that sure. The draft lesson plans, at least, seemed fine. He made a few notes to clarify wording, but left most of it as is. His stomach didn't feel good. He knew he'd probably purge his last meal within the hour. He hadn't been able to hold any food longer than that in over 6 days. Regaining his health after this would not be fun. Damn, Hisoka muttered. Iruka glanced at him, but it didn't look as if the Chunin was worried about anything new, just rereading the files on the sabotage that had been committed at the academy. Naruto's had been the most blatant by far, which did not make Iruka feel good for not having noticed it. But many other children had also been affected. Civilian children, for one, were generally pushed out of the profession, as well as the vast majority of women. The last academy leaders changed to make kunoichi lessons happen during the school days, when other lessons were taking place, had definitely not helped, but it had been worse than that. Females were actively discouraged from any kind of taijutsu, and many Chunin instructors had made a point of convincing any civilian parents or parents of girls in general to pull their children. And that didn't even touch on the children who had simply disappeared, and had their instructors look the other way and file false reports as to why. Iruka hadn't been the only loyal Chunin, it was true, but from what little he had been told, many of them had been led to believe that the Hokage conned their actions for whatever reason. Some had even been under genjutsus or other methods of control. Iruka had, thankfully, escaped that because he'd only begun teaching 2 years before and taken up Naruto's class immediately, meaning more attention was on him than anyone else, his main reason. As much as he hated admitting it, for being kind to Naruto in the first place had been because of that fact, and that had led Iruka to make sure there would be much more direct oversight in the new academy. Closing parenthesis. Do you have the stats yet? Chio asked. She and Hisoka had been put in charge of fact-checking, but the sheer amount they had sludged through in the past few days made it a slow and frustrating process. Yeah, Hisoka said. He passed a sheet over, and then resealed the rest. You okay? Iruka asked. It had been a long few days, and you could only stare at the reports for so long until you just needed to slump against the wall and cry. Yes, Taicho. Hisoka sighed. I better get at least 1 day off before you make me teach, okay? Iruka tried to laugh. If I can, I will. But don't get your hopes up. The group as a whole didn't exactly look thrilled with the news, but it wasn't exactly new. None of them had really thought they'd get the break since they'd been placed in the room, after all, but the hope was one they'd hold onto until the last possible minute. Here, Taicho, Fusuko said. She gave him their most recent counter-arguments. We'll have the next set done in the next 5 hours. Iruka nodded and got back to work. At this point he had the easiest job, keeping them on track in memorizing and double-checking everything. He didn't envy them for even a minute, but then he knew they didn't envy him either. Maybe, If he was lucky, he'd be able to finish reviewing these pages before Hisoka and Chio came up with their next set of data points for him to memorize, and then he could go outside and feel moving air on his skin for a few minutes. It'd be unlikely, of course, but, well, hope springs eternal and all that. The meeting room was stuffed so full it made his initial planning room look sparse. Part of it was the size. At more than quadruple the area of his planning room, it was hard to believe it could look crowded, so when it did you noticed. Another difference was how the room was filled. The paper had stuffed his planning room, sure, but a room stuffed with people lent itself to a different atmosphere, or, at least, a hotter one. That every single chair in the room, pressed so closely together that they clearly had to be climbed over to get to the ones further back, was filled also didn't help, nor did the anbu and the like that were, visibly and invisibly, hanging from the ceiling. Then there was the Hokage, a presence all his own that completely filled the full meter he himself had been allowed to occupy. Iruka had been given about half a meter next to him. It had been 3 hours already, and it did not look like it was even half over. Part of the problem was that while Iruka had, after a fashion, managed to explain most of his plan, the sheer level of noise in the room, caused by each and every member fully and firmly believing their question should be answered first, made it impossible for him to answer any. It did not help that, for reasons Iruka did not want to consider, the Hokage seemed to be treating the meeting as a break, and if his eyes weren't open Iruka would have been positive he was asleep. Instead he was only mostly sure. Iruka's attention was drawn to a sheet of paper being held up by, the Aburame head. He knew him. He'd taught his son, after all. The head had apparently tired of the noise, found some paper, and written his own question: how will you accomplish the desensitization procedures? Quote, hoping the man had managed to figure out a way to hear him, even if Iruka couldn't hear himself, he decided to answer. We're going to be expanding upon the desensitization measures already put in place involving the rabbit, Aburame-san. For the first year it will mostly be description-based, focusing primarily on understanding the unusual Kekai Genkai in Konoha and how to respect them and other unusual behaviors. The second year will involve getting used to things young children generally consider creepy or otherwise unlikable, seeing them to handle and eat insects, for instance, as well as getting incredibly dirty. That said, we will also be including things like cross-dressing and acting in a manner opposite that expected of them because those things are more of what boys tend to find uncomfortable. While each child will have to complete each task, they will only have to complete all of them by the end of the year and can take as long as they like on each individual one. The third year, when the children will be about 10, will go back to primarily discussion-based desensitization, but this time, it will be more about the things in the shinobi world which may cause emotional reactions, such as killing or being covered in blood. The more he talked, the more Iruka noticed the room quieting, and Aburame's intermittent nodding assured him that at least someone was benefiting from it. The fourth year will be focused on injuries and illness, and will include a mandatory period acting as an aide at the hospital, delivering meals, transporting patients, which will allow them to reduce the effect of their own personnel shortage. Finally, the fifth year will include the standard rabbit killing, but we've decided to modify that somewhat. Instead of it coming as a complete shock and being over and done with within an hour, we will tell the children a week ahead of time, and then make them use the rabbit afterwards, eating its tanning its fur. I believe that will more closely resemble the most frequent kind of killing for shinobi. You are given a mission in which you know killing may be necessary, and that killing is necessary, not just something that has no purpose. Quote, the Inazaka leader, Sum, if Iruka remembered Kiba's stories correctly, piped up. Well, that's all well and good for the Aburame, but what are you going to do to stop people from treating our Ninken like dogs? She practically spit the last word out, and Iruka knew he had to tread carefully, especially as he was fairly sure the Hokage was still asleep. Well, we're largely hoping for general exposure to do most of the work for us. Because we're adding 2 years to the academy, were able to accomplish a lot more than before, so as I've mentioned previously, much of the groundwork which had been reserved for the Genin years will be completed with the Academy students, allowing Genin to better use their Jonin leaders' time. One such method will be taking up D ranks in the last year, with teams, and I of course highly encourage you to place in mission requests for kennel upkeep and the like, to allow them to meet as many Ninkin as possible. On top of that, we will also be extending teamwork throughout the academy, instead of just teaching them in a more civilian-style format. Basically, in their first year they will be divided into groups of about 10 each. No formal leader will be nominated, or wholly necessary, but each team will be given a name. Right now we're considering using different species of trees, and compete against the other teams to win prizes on a bi-weekly basis. These teams will be switched every 3 months, to keep them from becoming too complacent, make up for students leaving, and allow those who had simply had an initially bad placement a chance to win at least once. The second year will be focused on partnering up individuals on a day-by-day basis rather than anything long-term, to force each child to meet all of their comrades, but the third year will begin with a more standardized layout. In order to keep variation, Year 3 teams will be 5-man units, and have leaders that switch on a weekly basis. They will be rewarded or punished as a group based on their success in various activities, but the leader will get it worst if their team doesn't do well. In the fourth year they will be switched to 4-man teams and allowed to choose their own leaders, with everything else from the third year carrying on, and in the fifth the teams will be changed every month, with the size of the team changing each time too. This will also be the first year where they will be entirely solo, at least 3, but no more than 5, of the months will be devoted to single-person teams, and single-person awards and punishments. Don't you think that's a bit too much? That's changing year to year? A man Iruka didn't recognize asked. I hope you're not suggesting that I try to make future shinobi less flexible. Iruka snapped. Then he blushed. His temper wasn't great at the best of times, and it hadn't been anywhere near that in over a month. Sorry. While we are trying to keep some things mostly stable, the teamwork, for one, I also want to vary how those lessons are taught, to give the students the broadest understanding possible. Quote, how easy will it be to go in and out of the academy? A woman asked. Iruka was fairly sure she was in Utatane, but didn't recognize her beyond that. Depends on the year, Iruka said. Our goal is basically for the first year to be as large as possible. That's part of the reason why we set it up the way we did, by including both descriptions of what shinobi life is like as well as an emphasis on skills useful in and out of it. Will I hope make parents more willing to let their children try just a year, if only to take advantage of the free education, while also allowing all of us to figure out if their child is actually a good fit. When the first year comes to an end, those we don't think will work will be encouraged to leave, those that are great fits will be encouraged to stay, and those in the middle will be allowed to do as their parents wish. The cutoff points, of course, can be varied as needed to allow for a shinobi population that is both large and talented. After the first year, however, it will get harder to drop out. While we will generally allow whoever wants to leave, a sufficient reason will be necessary for the child to be taken out if they don't want to be. As for getting in once a child has left, I have decided to make that a simple matter of passing a test. The test will be harder than it was in years past, of course, and they will likely be given some supplementary work no matter how well they score, but as low as they pass a test for a year and are no more than 3 years older or younger than they should be for that year, they will be allowed in. Oh, and to be clear, all children, in or out of the academy, must pass every year's end-of-year test to get into the next one. Quote, that, at least, seemed to make some of the noisiest stop and think. It wasn't how it had previously been done. It had been all but impossible to get back in after one quit, and it had also been ridiculously easy to drop out, which had led to a student population that shrunk every year. What about the Genin exam? The Yamanaka leader said. We'll be keeping the 3 tries, Iruka said, but they won't be able to take them any semester they like. They'll have to have completed at least the final year of the academy in full, and if they do not pass the first time, they will be put in a remedial class specifically for them, which will work more specifically on whatever issues caused them to fail the final year. That, at least, got a lot of support. Many children would become convinced in their first year that they could take on the world and try to test out immediately, then promptly fail, and many of the smarter ones would then be dumb and try again the next year, meaning they had to pass the final year to be remotely useful. Even the Genin core didn't pull from failures. This was particularly unhelpful because children would often only fail by a narrow margin, and in a specific area that could be easily trained up with individual attention. By placing them into a separate group and not forcing them to redo the entire year, any issues would hopefully be more easily sorted, keeping them from needing the full 3 tests to pass. Not only that, but even if they failed, they'd still have had 5 years of training, meaning that the Genin Corps could perhaps pull from some of the failures to bolster their troops and further grow the number of active ninja. How about? The meeting ended about 4 hours later, over a full work day of conversation and argument. In the end, while Iruka had to edit some of the smaller things, none of the powerhouses in the room had been able to come up with a better plan, and so the academy would officially begin its renovation the next day, or, rather, today. Iruka-sensei. A familiar voice yelped, startling the man as he had his first cup of ramen in a month. Ah, Naruto. It's good to see you again. He gestured to the chair beside him, and Naruto made himself at home as Iruka ordered a few more bowls to share between them. As he did so, however, he also took Naruto in. Thankfully, it looked as if the past couple of weeks had been good for the boy. He was smiling, of course, but he also seemed to already have muscle mass he hadn't before, and his forehead protector, Iruka's old one, was still snuggle. Why held in place by its blue fabric. His clothes, thank God, had also undergone a transformation. While he was still wearing the dreaded orange jumpsuit, Iruka could see mission-appropriate attire peeking out underneath, so he no longer had to worry about the giant target his former student would pass just by leaving the city gates. I haven't seen you in forever, Iruka-sensei. I was worried you were one of the ones who disappeared. Disappeared? Iruka asked, surprised. Yeah, have you been living under a rock? You know, a huge chunk of shinobi just vanished overnight. Well, over a couple days, actually, and Sakura-chan says it was less than a tenth, but I still say that's a lot. It is a lot, Naruto, especially given how many shinobi were in the force to begin with. Iruka affirmed. A tenth? What had he missed? How are you enjoying being a genin? I dunno, it's kind of nice, I guess. Not what I expected. Naruto said. We had to do this thing called a Jonin test, which we passed. Even with the TEM almost messing everything up. But then Gigi went and started making all those speeches about undermining the leaf, and my sensei disappeared, and us and Team 10s did too, and now we're all being taught by Team 8's sensei. Quote, do you like her? Iruka asked. He remembered Kurenai. She'd been one of the first to actually pick up her students. She's tons better than our actual sensei. Naruto crowed. Even the TEM thinks so. She's kind of mean to Sakura and Ino, though. She says they should focus more on being good ninja, so she's forcing them to run an obstacle course whenever she doesn't think they're trying hard enough, and she won't even let them participate every day unless they eat 2 full meals in front of her. Quote, do you understand why she is doing that? Iruka asked, but Naruto simply scrunched up his face. He apparently hadn't given it much thought. She wants to ensure that they have both the skills and the fitness required to do well and stay safe as kunoichi, and right now they do not. Quote, alright, I guess that makes sense. Naruto conceded. Iruka could tell he still wasn't thrilled about his crush being treated so badly, though. Then he grinned. The bastard, sorry, Sasuke, is in trouble, though. He said something about how she probably had nothing to teach him, and so now he spends every day under genjutsu. He still has to do all of the stuff we have to do, exercise, spar, D-ranks, but he has to do them all while trying to identify and break the genjutsu, and he sucks at that. Then Naruto grimaced. We have to help him, and Shikamaru and Shino, because they're doing the same thing, just to make sure we're all done. We're not allowed to leave until we are, and yesterday was the first time in a week we've finished in time for me to get ramen. Quote, Iruka stifled a laugh at the Jonin sensei's technique for helping all three boys learn to rely on their teams and keep their egos in check. Each of them were definitely set to be the genjutsu experts of their teams, so it even made sense from that aspect. And what has she done to you? Iruka asked. Naruto grimaced. It sucks. And Kiba, too, because she decided he was almost as bad as I was. Get a list of things to memorize every morning. Today's will be on chakra, and then the next morning I have to run the obstacle course once for every question I get wrong, and once for everything I do wrong in the obstacle course. It's so long, and hard, and boring, and I miss out on sparring if I take too long. That was actually not a bad idea. Motivating the prankster had never been particularly easy, but apparently her obstacle course did the job. He was also mildly surprised it had worked on Kiba, but he supposed he shouldn't be, neither liked doing the same exact thing every day. Before he could comment, however, Naruto continued. And the D ranks. You know we have to do at least 2 a day. We all have to be at the training field by 6, and then we do the morning stuff for like 3 hours, and then we have to start D ranks. Usually Kurenai-sensei only makes us do 2, but if they're really quick then she'll make us do 3 before we're allo wed to go home. All of us, every day, are doing at least 6 D ranks for the village. Don't they run out? Well, I have some good news on that front, at least. Iruka said. Starting with the new academy class, D ranks will begin to be completed while still in the academy, so your year will probably have completed the least of all of them by the end of it. Really? That's great. Naruto crowed. I can't wait to tell everyone else. Just then Chio appeared behind them. She nodded respectfully to Naruto. She'd seen too much of how the boy had been screwed over to treat him with anything less than proper courtesy, and turned to Iruka. Taicho, the blueprints are finished but you still need to sign off on them. Iruka sighed. I'll be there in a moment. Naruto, I'm sorry, but it looks like I'll have to go. I promise the next time we catch up I'll tell you what's going on in my life, but right now I really don't have the time. Naruto was still looking in confusion at the empty spot where the Nara had been, but he nodded firmly. I'll hold you to that, sensei. Iruka gave the boy one last pat on the head, before taking off. Based on the positioning of the sun, he now only had 6 days and 6 nights before the next academy year, and he needed every minute of it. 14 hours to go. Fuyuko called out, her voice artificially projected on the recently installed loudspeakers around the school. It was the day before classes were due to start, and Iruka had officially dropped a full stone in weight, which was not helping his stress level. Everything major, at least, was finished. Each classroom was set up, each class roster finalized down to 1 or 2 students, every class had an instructor and each assistant knew when they'd be rotated between classes and why. The training grounds had been completely cleaned by 3D ranks 2 days ago, their supply closets completely refilled within the last hour, and no less than 6 attempts to investigate the changes by high-ranking Leaf Shinobi and civilians alike had been foiled by the Anbu Guard. The Hokage had made it very clear that his actions were officially endorsed, and right now he just had to focus on putting them into action. In 2 hours, after he finally finished meeting individually with each instructor and assistant and anyone else working in the building and going over their curriculum, NTS, and reasoning behind changes, he'd leave the academy. He would go to the nearest Akamichi restaurant, because the head had kindly offered him 10 free meals at the end of the meeting from hell, and he would stuff himself silly. Then he would go to bed and not wake up until 2 hours before the students would be let in, at which point he would actually take a shower and neaten up for the first time in far too long, before going to the academy and checking, again, that everything was in place. and then he'd let the students in. He had, finally, been able to catch one of the Hokage's speeches several days before. The reason for that had been its focus, Iruka's own work. The Hokage had explained to the populace, far more eloquently than Iruka would ever be able to, that changes would be to increase the efficiency of the academy and that, for this year only, new students could be enrolled up until the day before the first day. He had managed to do that, explain the broad usefulness of sending your child for at least their first year, and reassure them that they didn't have to be alarmed, all without making it sound as if he was ordering them to do anything that they weren't already going to do. The academy-wide roster had nearly doubled. Thankfully, the Hokage had been prepared and sent him the instructors he would need to keep up with demand. Still, it had been a nasty shock to wake up to. Most of the children, of course, would be going into their first years, but some who scored high enough on the various slapped-together tests Iruka had made would be allowed to join at a higher level. For the first year of the new system, every student but the first years would be forced into remedial and supplementary classes on top of the ones they were supposed to be in, so it wouldn't be that big a deal to let a few fresh faces into the older years. "I'll see you tomorrow, Taicho," Yamashita Ren said, bowing to him as their meeting finally concluded. "I'm looking forward to working with you." "Yes, Ito-san. While I have no doubt some will leave over the course of the year, the first year will always be the largest. We were hoping to make the classroom cutoff about 20 students, 2 teams per class, if you will, but current personnel shortages obviously prevented that. You will have a full-time assistant, however, who I believe you've already met." Quote. She nodded. "Yes, Suzuki-san. It'll just take some adjustment, I suppose. I haven't taught in years, after all, and I certainly have not taught a class of 40. Iruka nodded in understanding. Ito Aikika was a retired chunin who had lost her leg while out on a mission. She had, nearly 20 years ago, taught almost 6 years at the academy, but then she'd moved on to the tracking division, which was where her injury had occurred. Iruka had chosen her for the first years because they would not be doing much in the way of taijutsu, and even with her impairment she'd have no trouble keeping up with them. That she was well-rounded helped. 2. He'd organized the older years so that most of them had an easily accessible teacher who had at least worked with ninjas in their projected career choice, but that simply wasn't possible with first years. Ito then moved on to the curriculum, questioning him over the significant time dedicated to calligraphy, to prepare for Fuinjutsu, shinobi codes, because they were easier to learn the younger you started, and science experiments, to demonstrate cause and effect and promote completing missions perfectly while keeping the students entertained, before moving on to the noticeable lack of kunoichi training. Well, part of that is because of the additional 2 years, Ito-san, but I have also expanded infiltration training to include the whole class. While it is unlikely male students will have to learn how to arrange flowers, it would also be good if they were taught how to recognize it being done wrong, and vice versa for their own undercover skills. Quote. Fair enough, she said, noting some things down. A few more questions, and she was leaving the room, letting in a soon-to-be fourth-year instructor to take the seat she had just vacated. 2 to go. Iruka could get through 2. Academy classes started at 7, now, instead of 8, but the first day of classes would require students and parents to be there a half-hour before that. The street in front of the school was so crowded a rat couldn't get through, and even more people were still adding themselves to its edge as the Hokage finally wrapped up his academy introduction speech. As he did so, Iruka looked around, trying to take in the faces of as many of his school's students as possible. Eventually, though, it was his time to go up to the podium. Hello, citizens of Konoha. I am the new academy head instructor, Yumino Iruka, and as the Hokage has already mentioned, I am also the one to have restructured the academy to its current form. Every year all of you entrust us with your children, and until now we did not treat that trust with the kindness and respect it deserved, however unintentionally. That changes this year. Beginning now, Your children will be given every opportunity to grow and prosper into citizens of Konoha anyone w. Old be proud of. Beginning now, the academy will no longer rely on natural talent as the main determination of class rankings. Beginning now, each and every child will have the chance to succeed, the chance to show their own will of fire. I will not lie. In the past mistakes were made. But I can promise you, each and every one of you, that I will do my utmost to make sure those mistakes are never repeated. Your children have the potential Konoha needs, and beginning now we will not let any more of it go to waste. On the small side, his own was the first door on the left when you entered the academic side, and had formerly been a classroom. He'd had it loosely divided into two. The front half contained a large table and chairs, for staff and student meetings. The back contained everything else, including his desk, a small cot and refrigerator, a wall of filing cabinets, and a wall of monitors. The monitors, which displayed nearly every part of the school one could reach, had been a tough sell. They'd been Chio's idea initially, a concept taken from her own time in T&I, but Iruka had initially been as leery of it as everyone else had ended up being. But the fact was it was necessary, despite any feelings of being micromanaged it may cause. The constant video and audio recordings, to be held as A-ranked material and kept in the highest level of record keeping, would at least keep the most blatant efforts of sabotage from happening, and allow Iruka, and any future head instructors, to keep an eye on everything. So far, from what he could tell, things were going to plan. The first few days by virtue of necessity would be almost entirely explanations of how the academy would now work. While all of the children had been warned that there would be changes, and many of them had even gotten additional informatio. And from well-connected guardians and family friends, it was still a lot. Iruka pulled a sheet out of his desk as he kept an eye on the monitors. He had, only 3 or so days ago, been given a list of children with potential issues. The first couple of children, he was told, had been kidnapped and forced into an unethical shinobi program that worked to destroy any sense of individuality. Each, he had explained to their instructors, would have to be pushed to interact with others as much as possible, and initially defended from any fallout from their odd behavior. The second group were those that had been in some way forced out, and their main issue was just making up for however they were sabotaged. Actually, most of the girls who hadn't been made to quit were also a part of this group, due to having been actively encore. Age 2, fangirl, by not only their parents, a historical problem among civilians, but also their instructors. Even Iruka had to some extent done that, though his issue was honestly in how he taught in general. After several unsuccessful attempts to help his students by going to the head had failed. In his first year, he had abandoned doing anything about their clear flaws, and simply taught to the genin test. He would make sure that did not happen to any other academy student again. They would not just be taught enough to not be left behind, they would be taught enough that, should they make any kind of effort, they'd actually be somewhat useful right of the bat. Thankfully, all of the children on the list looked to be paying attention without issue, but he'd have to be sure that that didn't change in the coming weeks. He paused. Was that a knock on his door? And wrote a memo for adding a doorbell, before getting up to open the door. A woman, definitely civilian, who he didn't recognize stood on the other side. Don't think I don't know what you're doing, young man. She said. What? I'm not stupid, you know. You're trying to make my daughter into a son, and I won't let you. Iruka tried, desperately, to figure out what she was talking about. I really have no idea what you mean, ma'am. He said. You thought you'd be able to get away with this, but I have a sister in record keeping. I figured it out, and I won't let you do it. Iruka felt like his brain was a bow being shot without an arrow. What are you talking about? You are making young women fight against boys in taijutsu. That wasn't new. Admittedly, it had been less common, and on the recommendation of Tsubasa all spars would now be solely decided on relative skill, which meant it would likely happen more frequently, but it still wasn't new. Before he could explain that, However, the women began shouting once more. I'm withdrawing my daughter immediately, and I'll have you arrested. Try finding a wife now. She looked as if she was about to say something more, but before she could, an Anbu with a dog mask appeared next. Tita Uruka, you said you had a friend in record keeping? He asked. She seemed surprised, which was likely the only reason she answered. Yes, she told me all about the nasty things the academy is doing. You're even recording my daughter. That won't be allowed, I assure you. What is her name? Sato Hana, she said. She seemed to be confused as to why he'd like to know. You're coming with me. Yumino-san, have a good day. The Anbu, and the woman, disappeared. Uruka blinked. Then he groaned. If she cared that much about something they'd already done, then every change he'd actually made would probably see dozens of parents showing up at his door every day. He'd make a suggestion box, and tell children to submit their own, or their parents', recommendations in there. When he got particularly pissed, he could burn it. He should probably also set up a way for parents to set up meetings with him, for when his suggestion box wasn't enough. Yay. 2 months into the new academy year, Uruka finally felt settled in. He'd begun exercising again the week before, and managed to meet up with Naruto twice since the first day. Some students were still not doing great, but those with significant issues were clearly improving in his 5th year. Students were already almost a third of the way to where the old Genin test had required, by the simple effect of more varied teaching, longer days, and lack of sabotage. Air camping trip. This, to be fair, was also a holdover from the old system, but with significant changes. The 4th years, in their 4-man groups with self-appointed leaders, had been given help in preparing their mission bags over the past week, but they were allowed to decide what to actually bring themselves. Today they would hike out to Training Ground 38, the 3rd largest training ground, and made to find their own place to stay the night. The first couple of days and nights would be spent with minimal aid from their academy instructors. Instead, they simply had to figure out how to live in the wild on their own, all while defending a scroll they had been given to protect from the other groups and steal as many others as they could get their hands on themselves. After midday on day 4, they would be called together for a debrief, and that evening they'd have to kill and eat specially prepared rabbits. Most students, Uruka knew, wouldn't have any issue with this, but he foresaw losing more than a few over the coming weeks. Right now, however, all of the groups had converged immediately outside the academy and were lazing around talking until it was time to leave. Uruka and the other instructors walked through, looking for what issues they'd likely have to deal with before the trip was over. That team had focused more on comfort than usefulness in packing, while that group had outright forgotten to pack certain materials. That one would have serious issues in terms of getting anything done. Uruka wasn't sure why, but they hadn't stopped arguing since the moment he spotted them, while that one was way too overconfident, and would fall apart the moment the first thing went wrong. Uruka noted down some of the worst offending teams, and best guess times in which they'd become a problem. He'd give the sheet to one of the instructors later so that they could use it as well as their own to decide what teams to veer near and when. They may want to avoid helping them at all cost, but the team 2 meters to Uruka's left had just realized that none of them packed any food, so it would be necessary. After seeing them off, Uruka went straight to the Hokage's office. This would be his 8th meeting with the leader in a year, and even still Uruka remained unused to being in the same room as the intimidating man. Ah, Yumino-san. It is good to see you. The Hokage said the second he answered. The rest of the room cleared as Uruka took position in front of his desk. How is the academy? It is doing well, Hokage-sama. Uruka said. We're still quite a bit behind from where I plan us to be next year, but that was expected because we have more to make up for. I am looking forward to shifting to 8-hour days, though. I haven't gone a day without a complaint about the length so far. Ah, but it was you that decided to allow both the suggestion box and meeting with parents. The Hokage smiled. Uruka knew he was getting a kick out of passing down the blame and work to him. On another note, I know it's a bit early, but could you begin putting together packets on this year's possible graduates? I would like as many of the Jonin as possible to know who their students will be, so that they have longer to get to know them. Hokage. Iruka asked, unsure of the reason for the change. Simply put, Iruka, we can no longer have Jonin senseis simply focus on teaching, and likely won't be able to bring that back for a number of years. By letting them know who to keep an eye on far earlier, it allows them enough time to become aware of their students' personalities and faults without getting in the way of their other work. Quote, so you won't be keeping 9 genin per jonin? Iruka clarified. Naruto seemed to vastly prefer Kurenai to Kakashi, but even that wasn't enough to make up for the lack of one-on-one training he got. No, that should be ending for the genin within the next few weeks. Then alright, Hokage-sama, I'll work with the instructors to create summaries of each student, and I'll divide them between those that will certainly pass and those that may fail. Quote, thank you, Yumino-san. The Hokage said. Finally, and I do apologize for having to ask this, as I'm sure you know my youngest grandson has taken to trying to sneak into the academy on a near daily basis. Do you have any suggestions as to stopping that? Iruka knew exactly what he was talking about. Konohamaru was hovering around the edges of the academy nearly every day now, having apparently recently decided that learning at the academy was his best shot at Hokage. Given his age, though, it wasn't as if he was or would be attending anytime soon, and his actions were disruptive enough that it was clear the Anbu had grown bored of preventing him. You could put him in a civilian school, I suppose. While I know it is traditional to have descendants of the Hokage privately tutored for security concerns, perhaps the additional socialization would be good for him. Perhaps, the Hokage said noncommittally, before dismissing the academy head. He knew it would happen at some point. Old habits die hard, after all, and despite Iruka's best efforts, many teachers, though entirely well-meaning, needed to be reminded on a near-weekly basis of how his academy was run differently. Still, he'd hoped to have at least gotten through one semester before it happened. No, Taicho. This report, turned in by one of your students, alleged that you implied to the class that those without bloodlines should act subserviently to those with them. Is this an accurate statement? I don't even have a bloodline, Taicho. Tanaka protested. It is entirely to make the statement without having one. Iruka countered. Tanaka sighed and thought for a second. I believe, comments I made when we were discussing the tracking profession may have given the impression that those were my beliefs. Are you aware, Sensei Tanaka, that only 1/4 of our Hokages held a bloodline? Quote, yes, Taicho. Are you aware, Sensei Tanaka, that many of our most powerful Jonin, including Meidagai and Kurenai Yuhi, also lack bloodlines? Yes, Taicho. Then why is it that you implied such a thing? Quote, while I admit my statement was in bad taste, it was specifically in reference to the tracking department and its subdivisions, where it is commonly held that the Hyuga, Inazaka, and Aburame excel. Quote, and could their natural abilities not be competed with using a combination of developed chakra sensing, experience, fuinjutsu, and creativity? Or some combination thereof? Yes, I do believe that would be possible. Quote, then why should your students feel as if you basically told them not to try at all? Further, are you aware that over half of the tracking department has no bloodline? I was not, but. So, given your statements, do you not believe that no one without bloodlines should even attempt to rise to the top of tracking? And do you not see that that would keep many children from attempting that specialization in the first place, leading to an even greater personnel shortage for tracking than what the village as a whole is currently experiencing? Quote, I realize my comments were in error. Sensei Tanaka said. I'm sure you have. Iruka replied. But what are you going to do to remedy the situation? The 5th year sensei considered for a second. Taicho, permission to bring in some trackers without bloodlines to be interviewed by my students. I do believe that would be a good idea. Iruka said. With the meeting having wrapped up, he allowed the sensei to stand and begin heading towards the door. Oh, and sensei. The man half turned. Do ensure that we do not have to have another of these chats. Yes, Taicho. The man vanished from the doorway. Uruka sighed and went back to his desk to file a report. The other man's statement had, in the end, been fairly innocuous, and now a plan was in place to deal with any damage that could possibly have been done to the student's career aspirations. But Uruka knew that far worse statements would likely be made before all was said and done, and far more uncomfortable meetings would have to take place to keep the academy operating as he wished. Still, though, he couldn't help but smile. Compared to what the academy had been when he was a teacher. Well, perhaps Konoha would turn out alright after all.